Yeah, before every class, I go to nature first, and before every storytelling event, I go to nature first, and it's where I receive the understanding of what to bring to you. And I could say it also is as I listen to nature, I understand more about how to come into relationship with my true nature, with our true nature, the nature of living in these times. And it's often one of the most inspired places I know to go. And this morning I was walking through nature, through Bowen Island, asking, what wants to come through today? What wants to come through in this particular group, in this particular alchemy? And something that's never wanted to come through me came alive. And so, Cami, I'm just like, I am so alive in the mind-blowing moment that you are here on Bowen Island and you're saying, I want to go from being a writer to storytelling. And what came through me this morning, I wish I had my phone as proof, but it basically said the act of standing behind a word in its written form is one thing. It requires, and as a writer, I say this, it doesn't require a tremendous amount of courage to write for yourself. It's a very easy place, as we know in social media, to be cruel. It's very easy to get carried away in the inhumanity. You can say anything through the written word, but to say something in the spoken word, you've got to be anchored into the truth of what you're speaking. You have to be anchored into the aliveness of it, or it's so easy to get blown off. And I bet Bernice practices as an acting coach, that act of how powerful can you be in your presence? Because if there's not presence, if there's not truth in what you're saying, then there's not belief. And what are we doing in Storytellers? We're bringing into new avenues of understanding ourselves in this world, understanding ourselves in our consciousness, and understanding how to navigate. And as storytellers, we are guides. We guide people through the landscape consciousness, and we can guide people into the portals of grief, into the portals of joy, into the portals of connection. We are some of the most powerful people on the planet. And it's one thing to write, and it's another thing to tell. And so I really appreciate Cami presencing this, that there's a bridge that we cross, and it's a whole other skill set. And may we land ourselves today into the landscape of sacred storytelling and what that's all about. So I invite you to close your eyes. I invite you to close your eyes and bring all your energy home. Imagine that you could bring strings of threads of connection all the way back to yourself. So imagine that your energy is connected to all the people that you love and the things that you care about and the things that are tugging on you. And you might see all these energies in terms of golden threads. And you don't have to get caught up in the story of what they are, just noticing how big your energy web is and all the different stories that live in all those threads. And now, like a nice spider, you're going to weave them all in and bring them all home into your body. We're already doing a practice of intuition, and we're already practicing our learning our individual ways of sensing and noticing. We all do this in different ways. So some of you might see those golden threads, and some of you might sense them. Some of you might be open to the imaginal plane. Some of you might be getting used to it. This is all about discovering your way. What's your way? So as you bring that energy all the way home, notice if there's a place in your body that just absorbs it, that goes, oh yeah, yum, that needed that extra nourishment of energy. And just sensing into that space, sensing into that space, feeling it coming deeper and deeper. We are all storytellers, and we're talking story all the time. And this is an opportunity for you to really sense into what called you here today on this day of all days. Why are you here? Is it because there's stories knocking on your door, pleading to be spoken through you? Are you one of those old storytellers that is carrying the old stories forward? Are you by chance someone who has a muse that's bothering you and is saying, please, 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 please tell me. I'm inviting you for this moment to really tune into, why are you here today? What is calling you forward? And in this way, I invite you to really come alive in that question. What is calling you forward? I'm going to give you a quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories will saddle us, and they will ride us, and they will whip us onward, and they will tell us what to do. And before I continue with this quote, I really want to invite you into a moment of thinking about that. What are the stories that have gotten you? The stories told by your friends, by your family, by yourself, to yourself, about the world, about our future. What are the stories that are telling you how to be, how to do? Because the quote continues. They will tell us what to do, and we'll do it without questioning. Let us not put a we in this, but let's perhaps say that some. I'd like to imagine, if you're here, you're questioning. The task of listening to be free, the task of learning to be free, requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name those stories, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit. And I love that quote because it really is such a fabulous introduction to the journey of becoming what I call a sacred storyteller. And today I'm going to take you into a journey of, what is this landscape? What is the landscape of becoming a sacred storyteller? And what I'm going to also do is I've got a little presentation that I'm going to share with you. And pardon me, it's going to take me just 1 second to bring it all the way up and beautiful for you. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into a journey of, what is this landscape of sacred storytelling? What does it mean? I'm going to go over a little bit of a global perspective on storytelling, the power of words. We'll talk about, what is a story? What's a sacred story? What does it mean to be a conscious creator? And really what I'm working our way towards is, how do we engage story as a tool for healing? So that's the introduction of our journey today. I like you to know that I love hearing your voice. I love hearing your voice. I love seeing your comments. So as things come alive for you today, one story is our story. And when we come to the threshold of sacred storyteller, it's always fed and nourished by our conversations. So please know that when I ask for your insight and input, it's a real question. And that's the joy of doing this in an interactive way. So I'll just throw that out there. A little bit about, who am I? What brings me to you? I will tell you that I grew up on a farm in Vermont. I grew up deep in a farm, and I won't actually share this part. And my journey in the farm was getting to live a lot of time in the wildness by rocks, by creeks, by stones. My dad was a town veterinarian in rural Vermont. And so I was introduced to wildness at a really young age. And it was just an incredible gift to receive. I learned the responsibility of storytelling in kind of a rough way. And I'll tell you how I got there, which was, it started when I was very, very young. My parents separated, and I ended up moving from state to state into a new school almost every year. Do we have other people that have had the experience of moving around a lot as a kid, going from new school to new school? Okay, Kimberly. Yeah. Just, if you didn't have the pleasure of that experience, Bless you. It sucks. I don't know if it was for you, for Kimberly. It sucked for me going and being the new kid every single year, having to learn a new culture, a new community, everything that kids are learning. It was really, really hard. It made me a very, very astute, powerful observer, which is one of the first, skills of storytelling. But it also gave me a real desire to escape. And so I escaped into stories. They became my sanctuary. They became my safe place. And as I got older and ended up going to a high school where I got to stick around for a long time, I experienced one of the next quite traumatic events in my life, which was the suicide of my best friend, Sheila Morris, when we were 16. And there was no system at that time to really address grief like I think we have now gotten accustomed to. And it was really like just get up, go back to normal, and get yourself back to school. And I went in that moment of extreme grief to the place that had always been my sanctity, my sanctuary, which was storytelling. But for the first time, I wasn't reading someone else's story. I was writing my own story and a desire to make sense of it. And it's where I learned at a very young age that we can take these things that make no sense in the human world and we can bring them into the world of story and something else can come in. We can receive guidance, we can receive insight, we can become more of ourselves. That was written into a play. Sheila and I had been in theater together, and somehow it just made sense to create a play. And that won a role in a young playwriting festival. And I got to see that story on the stage. And that's where I started to learn responsibility. Because what I learned was that what you put out into the world comes back. And as I shared my grief with the world, others shared their grief with me. And I was very young. And all of a sudden, I was standing at the threshold of everyone bringing their stories of suicide and death and unprocessed grief. And I learned at a very young age that a storyteller is not a dumping ground. It's not where you just put it out and then it's done. That it's a very powerful role of guardianship of what those stories evoke and provoke in others. I went on to study theater professionally. I went to New York City, got to study with Sandy Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse. I learned at a very young age that while I got to work off Broadway and at Summer Stock, that I was not meant for that world. But there was something that I was learning in that world, that when we got into the world of theater, there was this energy that was being created. And I could feel it in the room, and it was alive, and it was magical, and it wasn't being caught on video. You could videotape something, a live theater performance, and you would never get the sensation of what was being created there. And I started getting very curious about what was this energy that we were creating there. And I had this obsession where every time we opened the door and I saw all the energy go out, I'm like, wait, we can do something with that. And so that question of what are we doing and how can I work with it became one of those driving questions. I went on to kind of pursue my love of the environment and environmental protection and nature and storytelling and the arts. And I got to go to the school called Prescott College. And it was a very small school for the liberal arts and the environment. And there I got introduced to wilderness leadership. And I didn't realize at the time, but that would bring me right to the roots of who I am as a storyteller. Because for the next 7 years, I would work as a wilderness guide. And what do we do in the wilderness? Well, we sit around the fire and we listen. And it's a completely different culture of listening. It's not information based, it's community connection based. When someone starts to speak, others know that they must have something to say. And there's a quality of listening there that I really don't get to experience in most cities. And I didn't realize that that was another piece of what was rooting me and reconnecting me to this ancient aspect of being a storyteller, which, spoiler alert, we're all storytellers, right? It's in our nature, it's in our being. I went on to get a master's in social work, again, really looking at this real desire and passion to be a part of protecting our planet, being a part of the great movement of our time to get back into balance. And I was learning through my experience with the wilderness that really, if we couldn't save ourselves, meaning that if we couldn't heal ourselves, if we can't take care of ourselves, how on earth could we take care of the planet? And so it became a act of activism to go into that channel. My love of nature, of earth, brought me into this love of people and humanity. I eventually went to San Francisco. I got to work with Al Gore at his television network and produced the Green Channel, And this I thought was like a pinnacle experience where here we were able to put any story we wanted to into the world that was hope with the great hope of if we brought the information, it would bring people to inspiration, activation, and activate the whole channel. Well, what we learned was that people don't respond to information. We saw all the data. The data told us that people respond and connect to storytelling. And that was my golden key. That was my golden key out of that world and into the truth of where does real change happen? That it happens internally in our minds, in our stories, and how we live them, how we tell them, and how we play in them. And that led me into that, back to that greater inquiry of, well, what's happening in the room when we're telling story together? And understanding that it's not just happening on the stage, it's an absolute relationship with the people who are catching, the participants, the co-creators of the story. And that led me into this process of creating story ceremonies. And we started doing these really amazing kind of large ceremonies with 200 people. It was with Starhawk in the woods, looking at how do we heal the story of the witch? How do we take on the story of Medea around betrayal and forgiveness and the fear of the feminine? How do we do this together? And what we were learning was that, and through also getting to study with other teachers like Ariel Spilsberg of the 13 Moon Mystery School, is that there is a way that we can consciously activate and use this energy, and that this idea of um, working with story and ritual is one of the oldest things on the planet. And the more I got to learn about the history of it, that the first actor was doing a shamanic act of bringing the spirit of Dionysus into presence in ancient Greece, it all began to make sense. And that the way of being a storied human is our way of being in connection to ourselves, with the unseen world, and with each other. And so that's a little bit of the journey of what brings me here to you today. And now let's dive into it. Let's dive into it. So, Hawaiians say that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. And if you haven't had a chance to see the hula and experience the hula, not Elvis Presley version, but like, real live, you'll get to see people who are still very much have intact culture around understanding that the power of their words can move the clouds, can call the rains. It's not fantasy, it's not fiction. They haven't been separated from it. Hula is an active prayer that involves the voice and the sound and the resonance. Sicilians say that words poke holes in the universe. And I always think about that when my temperature gets a little rise. I don't know if any of you are fire signs. I've got some Aries in me. And when I start to feel that fire rise, I have to be really careful with what my tongue expresses, because words can't be taken back. If you're lucky and you're around people that know how to do repair, then perhaps. I love this. Words poke holes in the universe. There's also an expression in physics that speaks to the presence that words will stay in a space forever once they are spoken there. So I think about that when going through some of the ugliest truck stops when driving across the country. I can speak poetry here, and that will live here too. Australians say the stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. Maoris say that words don't describe a thing. They are the thing. And in Japanese, there's a word called kotodama. It means word spirit. It refers to the original divine spirit of a word before it enters the world of thought waves. The significance of kotodama is that words are alive and they have the power to create before they even meet us. Abracadabra. It's one of the oldest words on our planet. It's from Aromatic mysticism. It means I create as I speak. Now, look, you guys, I'm from the East Coast. And is anyone else here from the East Coast? that where it's in the water, we just have this little aspect of cynicism in us. We can't help it. It's just like it's just very normal. Seems weird, and she's like and so when I started being introduced to some of these concepts, like see the glass is half full rather than half empty. I thought that was California woo woo stuff, and when I got into this and started learning, no, this is ancient. This is rooted to the oldest knowledge on the planet. This is about as far from woo woo as you can get. It's old. This is old knowledge. And a lot of us have lost it. All the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I think this is one of those pieces where I like to pause because there's so much disagreement about so many different things, and there's so many different disembodied stories that are going on, running free and wild in our times. It's so and there's so many stories that are running out, and we don't even know who created them. We don't know the storytellers anymore. We don't get to be in relationship with our animal instincts because we can't feel the resonance. And right now, this is just this piece where there's an agreement among all of us that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence, and it still is. I love this poem. It's called Magic Words, and it was translated by Edward Field from the Inuit. It's Eskimo Inuit. In the very earliest time when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. And sometimes they were people and sometimes animal, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was the time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen could happen, and all you had to do was say it. Nobody could explain this. That's the way it was. If someone is looking for a creative prompt today, wouldn't it be fun to go find and catch the story that tells us how humans lost the power of their language? I don't know that story, but I'm sure it's flying around willing to be caught if someone's willing to listen and ask it. So what does a story do? Let's get into it. By the way, these images were made by Mark Smith. He has been a student in the School for Sacred Storytelling, and one of the things that came alive in him were these characters to come through his stories. And so it's such an honor to get to have his imagery in this presentation. So before I get into it, I'd like to hear from you. What is it? What do stories do? Does anyone want to tell me or tell us? I'd love to hear your voice in this. What is it? What's a
One
story?
possibility is they can give us hope for, yeah.
Okay. Right, that's an action. They do. Um,
Well, it depends on the story, but they have
right.
the potential of giving us hope.
I wanted to stop there for a moment because I was just speaking to one of our guest teachers in our school, Nick, and he has worked on the Truth and Reconciliation project in South Africa. It's part of his family legacy work. And and he now works on the front lines of different war zones, working with creativity and story. And I was asking him, I was like, how soon do you come in with a story when someone's in a traumatic space? How soon can you help them be in the story? He said, when people are in that kind of traumatic times, there's only one kind of story you can give them. It's a story of hope. And it's one of those things that as storytellers, we really need to know when to listen, when to ask, and when to give. And this could be one of the most important times on the planet to make sure that you've got a back pocket filled with stories of hope, because it could be the best nourishment that you give to those around you. Thanks for bringing that to us, Lorna. Jan saying connection, right? They create connection. Karen says it gets my spirit to come alive. Right. Isn't it fun to tell stories? It's just, you just come alive with it. Have you ever watched someone and all of a sudden they completely change right in front of you because like the spirit of life is just flowing through them? Um, it's so much fun. Fonda says it can heal. Right. They can bring healing. It can right, and saying it can replenish me, right? I can be so tired. It happened to me the other night. I did a story here in Bone Island. I was so exhausted beforehand, but then as soon as they're there, and as soon as the energy of the spirit comes alive, it's just and that piece, because 2 of you have mentioned it, it's not when we're talking about sacred storytelling, we're not just talking about rote memory, right? We're not talking about speaking someone else's words. We're talking about an aliveness that gets to come through. And so we're talking about a connection. I'm getting ahead of myself because you guys are so ahead of me. I'll come back to that. Sneaky technique, you guys, to get me into sacred storytelling before we talk about storytelling. Okay, Kimberly is saying, I learn from stories. Yes. Kathy's saying that they can help you resemble the pieces of your life, reassemble. That's beautiful. And to speak about that, that stories, they're not linear, right? They're not your to-do list of everything that you did. Stories are a non-linear expression of life. One of my favorite story prompts when you come to the threshold of talk about a really meaningful moment in your life or a really challenging moment in your life or a really big moment in your life, you can start with a simple story prompt. Where does this story really begin? Where does the story really begin? Because you are woven of a big life and you're not just one human. We're talking about your soul, the journey of your soul. So something that happened when you were 3 might actually be absolutely connected to something then you're 70. So that's a fun prompt to play with. Sarah is saying they inform who we are and who we can be, don't they? Cammie's saying that they educate. You guys, if I say somebody's name, just know that for some reason I'm not wearing my glasses today, and this is a new experience of me needing to wear glasses while doing this. So please pardon if I misspell a word, misspeak a word. Ginny is saying that Sinead O'Connor once said, music and song helped her to transform all her pain into beauty. Ah, isn't that it? Isn't that it? When it's in the highest expression. I want to just note that when it's at its highest expression. And I just want to speak about this because now you've opened this beautiful conversation, Jenny, which is that there's a journey in the expression of becoming a storyteller. And that sometimes, as you said, our stories, they'll help us process, they'll help us learn, they'll help us reflect. We're not only doing it just in ourselves, but we're also doing it in the larger expression of ourselves. We can get access to wisdom. We can get access to insight that we might not have when we're in the middle of it, just the doing of it. Stories telling lets us be in the experience as much as in the doing of it. And that might be the great separation of it, of what it is just to be in the doing of it and the experience of taking time to reflect and write yourself as a storied being. Then there's a process when we come to the threshold and we do the giveaway. And we give that story away because we know it's not just ours, it's someone else's, it's all of our story. And when we come to that place, now we've gone through this work of becoming a storyteller. Not just a storied being, but a storyteller, a guide. And when that happens, it needs to have one crucial ingredient. And this is such a key ingredient, and you absolutely need it to get people through the darkest parts of their story, the hardest parts of your story. And that key ingredient, does anyone, well, you all know it because Jenny just wrote it. It's beauty. And when you fill your stories with beauty, they say that beauty feeds the soul. You've now become a trustworthy storyteller. And so I really want you to start looking around at the stories that you're surrounded by. And you can ask these very simple questions. Is this story creating connection? Is it bringing us closer? Is it giving me more insight? Is it opening my channels for love? Is it bringing me to an evolutionary conscious experience where, oh my gosh, I just got to learn from Jane's incredible experiences. She's walked through a couple thresholds. She might have gone into a couple pitfalls. She climbed out of the snakes. She got to the mountain, and now she can tell me how to skip over the potholes so I don't have to, so I can go find my own. So it's like there's an evolutionary experience that happens when we're so generous with sharing our stories in that way. And that's a very different thing than I'm in the pitfall and life hates me, right? That's like I went in the pits. It sucked. The snakes had sharp teeth. It was so scary. You guys, I watched Harry Potter last night, and it was so scary. But I learned that I've got this superpower. I learned that I've got guides. I learned how to get out. And when I share that, now I am one of the most generous beings in the world. And there's something else that shifts and transforms in that moment. When you're committed to being a storied being and weaving yourself into the thread of life, that also means that it's your secret escape hatch out of shame and guilt. And if there's anything that I've seen where people get stuck in a place in their story because there was a misstep or there was a misalignment, and even that language, that framing, look, we're human beings learning how to be here together. Nobody said that we were supposed to be perfect. Isn't that it? I'm a human. I'm not perfect, but we're here learning how to live in this place together. And when we understand that we can take those stories, and those stories where we had a misstep, where we went out of alignment, can become the most powerful expression of bringing us back into alignment and giving real gifts to give others when we do the good work of mining them and harvesting the bounty of the experience. And now you become a storyteller. Now you become a storied human. Now you've got all these gifts to give. And if there's anything that breaks my heart faster, is when I see someone in their second or third act of life and they say that they have no stories. I'm like, oh, this is a symptom of a misstoried culture, which doesn't understand where the value is living. And, Stephen Jenkinson, who's been one of my teachers, says that elders are made by those around them, which means that one of the best things we can do is ask people for their stories. You guys, I'm going so off script. I don't know who you are or what you're doing, but you've inspired me to go wildly off my script. But here we are. Jesse's also saying a friend of mine visited Katrina, and people have said helpful thing. Right. That we need people to listen to our stories because something happens when someone is there to witness our story. We can hear them. We can hear where we get stuck. We can hear where we're playing the same role over and over. We can hear when we say the same lines. There is an amazing TED Talk by this guy, and please forgive my memory. His name begins with a D. It's TED. If you look up storytelling TEDx Charlottesville, you'll find it. I think his first name is Donald. It's a great talk, and he tells a story about when he broke his leg as a child. His mother said, "You will never tell the story in the same way twice." Talk about mom wisdom, right? She was telling him that he was not going to get stuck in being someone that was still injured, that he was healing, and that his story would have to change as he healed. And she was teaching that, like that's one of the most powerful things that we have, that our stories should always be changing like a tree. And so when we think about what do stories do, coming back to that idea, is that they grow if we treat them as they are alive. So basic idea of what a story is, it's an operating system. It teaches us our beliefs, our values, and what we believe is possible. It's one way of looking at a story. When I took that walk into Topanga Canyon got very upset with me and it said, Leah, I swear, I don't know if it was the trees, the rocks, the dirt, I don't know who was speaking, but Topanga Canyon had big opinions about this. It said, Leah, that is the most grotesque description of a story. You must be more honest. And I was like, well, Topanga Canyon, what do you mean? What is your description of a story? And Topanga Canyon said, well, a story, it's a library of the soul. And I was like, yeah, a story is a library of the soul. These living stories, they're bigger than us. My story is made of my mother's story, of my grandmother's story, of my great-great-grandmother's story. My story is made of this land that I'm standing on right now. My story is made of the people who I'm surrounded by. And they can be so big if we allow them to be. Which takes me to, what is a sacred story? So does anyone have ideas? What is a sacred story? You can pop that in the chat. What distinguishes it? We've kind of hinted, we've danced around it a bit. One way that I think of a sacred story is that we're saying that by saying that something is sacred, we say, I see the life in you. I see the divinity in you. And so when I think of a sacred story, that that there's a life in it beyond my own, that it's a living being that I'm coming into relationship with. And so when I'm telling a sacred story, it means that I'm listening as much as I'm speaking. And it's easy to say that if I'm telling a creation story of the sisters on Bowen Island, right? Because it's an old, story about the mountains here, and it's easy to consider that a sacred story. But what if your own story is a sacred story? When we start looking at our own stories as being sacred stories, as having a life beyond our own, even within them, we start looking at that idea of, oh, we're telling the story of a soul, and not only just our soul, but the soul of humanity. And so when I come to the threshold as a sacred story, I'm not telling my story just about me anymore. I'm telling the story of us as it's living through me. So that means that when I tell you a story about the experience of getting cancer, it's not about cancer by the time I brought the story to you. That's long gone. That's the information. That's the facts and information, right? Right. Dawn knows that. Now I'm telling you the story about an initiation. And this is a universal story of going through initiation, and everyone goes through them. And everyone goes through initiations where something is lost or taken and something is given. And you don't know if you're going to make it out alive. These are the three aspects. And we do them through our lives, we do them through our relationships, we do them through our work. We're always being initiated, but we don't always have the context to live that as a storied people in our current culture. And so when we come to life as a sacred storyteller, that's one of the things that we're reclaiming. We're reclaiming ourselves as living in a world that is constantly initiating us and those around us. Now, as sacred storytellers, again, what's our main role as guide? Right? We're guiding people through life. We're giving them a story. We're giving them stories of hope and vision to live their way towards. Ben Okri I just read this quote by him that said, history belongs to historians. The vision of the future belongs to storytellers. Now, look at what has happened with the stories of our time. And let's get a sense of, wait a second, what kind of storytellers have you been listening to? And how much real estate of your consciousness and your imagination has been hijacked by images of a world that you don't want to live in? And then how does that influence the role that you play in this life? I think of storytelling as a revolutionary act. It's a revolutionary act to unplug from stories and to reweave a story of health and wellness and connection and healing in a world that respects reverence for all life. And I have to believe that if you're here in this world of sacred storytelling, that you might be drinking from that same stream of thought, that you too want this and you want to be one of those people who wants to weave the world into being, that wants to speak, sing, and chant the world that you most want into being. And we do this through the way that we love, the way that we live, the way that we speak, and the stories that we tell, and the way that we hold others in their stories. How many of you have gone through an initiation in life? Where you kind of got battered and punched and things like that. Yeah, I mean, we've all gone through them. And sometimes, if you're around people, it's like they're kind of watching you in a boxing ring, and they're getting like, kind of enthralled by the drama of it. They're like, man, she's getting banged by life. But if you've got a storyteller at your side, they're not watching you in the boxing ring. They're cheering you on. They're saying, wow, you're being initiated by life. You're coming face to face with your shadow. That must suck. Do you have the power to face that? Oh my gosh, some part of you is being asked to, the victim part must be needing to leave, and your courage, wise woman, must be being asked to come forward. You must be being asked to create new boundaries. You must be being asked to use your voice in a new way. You have a storyteller guide at your side. They help you live through your life in a whole new way and meet these beautiful moments of challenge as initiations or your guardians. Lauren has seen me do this class a bunch of times, as has Terry. We've got some people that have been here for a while, and they can attest that I don't know who's in the room, but I have gone so far off script and gone into a whole other aspect of teaching this class. So I'm so inspired by who you are, because this is the one thing I know about storytelling, is that it is a partnership. It is a partnership. Uh, Michael Mead, who I just adore, who's come and done several classes for us a long time. And, he says that oftentimes whenever anyone asks him to come in and tell a story, he has his stories that he tells. But when one comes in and it wants to be spoken to a group, if he doesn't speak that story, if he goes along with his ego mind and says, well, this is what I should be doing, sometimes he'll feel sick for days afterwards, that it was out of alignment, that there was something else that really wanted to come present. And so, these storytellers are wild stories, and you are obviously a wild and very deep and profound group, because you're bringing out a deep and unexpected conversation on who we are as storytellers. We're coming near to the end. I didn't cover half the curriculum because you guys just kind of like drove it's in this direction. But here's what I'll share is I'm going to share I'm going to share. I'm listening for what story wants to come to you today. I'll give you two little stories. Oh, Kimberly, thank you. How to flip a story. Let's do that before we're all done. So when we go into change a story, there are a lot of ethics involved. I do a whole course on, the ethics of changing a story. You gotta remain true to it. If you just like change it because you just want it to be different, it will have no weight. The words won't live. It won't continue. Um, but you can go in for this deeper kind of listening. And when we're talking about a sacred story and we're talking to connection, we're talking about a life. We talked about that life force that comes through us. And there's an alchemy that's happening, and it's connection to earth, connection to spirit. It gets ignited by the battery power of our heart, comes in through resonance, comes into shape and form, and it can change shape and form around us. And it's kind of the alchemical process of becoming a storyteller. And so if we're not speaking truth, there's no weight in the words, and they'll just they won't go very far. Or they can do great destruction, but that's something else. But for the point of what we're doing, we want things to live and live strong, and so in that way, what do we fill those stories with? And what do we fill those words with? And so when we come in, a lot of it is around intention. What's your intention? So if you're in a real rough spot and you've got someone, let's say that there's a bad guy playing out in your story, and they're doing something that's really not cool on the human side. And we're gonna talk about telling your story from a human perspective and a soul perspective. And whenever we do this, it's really important. Don't slip out of the world that you're living in, because you're here. We're here living in the human dimension, and there are rules of right and wrong, and there are consequence, and I'm not saying escape that, ignore it through the fantasy of creativity. That's not what I'm saying, right? So everyone's got me. I'm not saying, escape this world. I'm saying let's learn how to live in this world even more through getting more guidance and insight. So what happens when we open up our imagination, in the Kabbalah tradition, they say that the imagination was the pathway to relationship with spirit. And it was considered a secret teaching that not everyone could have access to. So when we start talking about how powerful our imagination is and what we're getting, so when we start opening to the power of our imagination, we start opening to the unseen world to get guidance and insight and wisdom way beyond perhaps our human years. There's one rule that is there. You can't you can't operate through your ego. So if you want to go through a story where you're wanting to heal a story and there's a great bit of conflict. This is I'm playing with this kind of story. There's a conflict and let's all do this together. Can everyone imagine some moment in your life where things are not going smooth sailing? There's a little bit of a disruption. Somebody's bothering you. You might think of a couple of swear names when they come into your mind. Does everyone have and we can say that they're the bad guy in your story. Can everyone play with me on this one? No? Okay. So we're playing, and as we're playing, and that's an act of that means that we can push a couple of comfort zones when we're playing. We can fall on our knees and brush them off and get back up, right? We're that's what we do when we play. We learn. So you've got the bad guy in your story, and now we're going to play, and we're going to go into the imaginal plane. We're leaving the human dimension. We're going into the imaginal plane, and we're going to recast this person. Okay. So what is required is that we have to be able to live outside the story that we're right. That's an ego thing. Okay? We have to be open to receiving insight and a perspective that we've never had before through where we've been positioned in the story. Okay, so we're relocating ourselves in the story. So now we can get new perspective and new ideas and new ways of a new approach. And now we do the sumo story sacred flip, where you take that person from the bad guy and you go and now you recast them as your master teacher who's come in service to your soul and might even be willing to take one for the team. That's how devoted they are. They are so devoted to you that they're willing to look like a total jerk in the human dimension so that your soul has the opportunity to learn something it's always wanted to get to do through the human experience, to give you an opportunity to transform something within you. It takes a bold and brave mind to play this game. It's not for the weak of heart. You've got to be willing to shift. You got to do some stretching, right? So, what if they came as your master teacher? What is the opportunity that is being presented to you through this situation? Do you need to establish clear boundaries? Do you need to learn how to say no? Do you need to learn how to be more generous? Do you need to learn how to be more organized and structured? Are you learning about how to express your sacred rage? Is compassion and empathy a muscle that is being asked to work out? You're not they're not still in the human dimension. You're playing this out in another dimension, another field, so you can play this, and you aren't the victim anymore. You're the hero of the story, and someone has come in devotion to you on their knees in a prayerful way to say, I will help serve you in a way that no one else is willing to. It doesn't mean that it makes it easier to play it out in the human dimension, but when you open and spread out your story and give yourself another role to play, and if you can receive some medicine or tools or guidance in this way, now all of a sudden, how does that change the way that you choose to relate to your life and the role that you're playing in the story? It's a lot to do in 3 minutes or less. That's why we take an entire 6 weeks to go over this. Um, but it's an introduction. It's a quick flip that you can apply in your life. Okay, so this is where we're at. We're nearly at the end of our time together. And we've gone over, a lot in a very we've gone to the depths. We've gone through a couple of canyons together. We might have even scaled a mountain or two in terms of what is it to be at the threshold of a sacred storyteller? And what are the roles and responsibilities? What are the gifts that we give to this time and beyond? I told this story and someone said, hey, tell me the origin of that salmon story. Did everyone here see the salmon story? That's no. I'm going to tell you the salmon story. because it's one of my favorites. I was just given this story, and I was given the story. I'll give you the context that it even came to me in, because I've been working on a big book, and in this big book, it deals with extinction issues. And in the mythos of the book, it actually talks about how the animals leave this plane, but they go somewhere else. We've been talking about the ethics of what is it to work with young children and dealing with the story of six mass extinction and the mythos, the mythology, and the responsibility of storytelling. So I was telling some people this wondering that I'm living with right now. And it was through one of them, my dear friend Amrahel, who's come and taught a class here, who gave me this story. And again, I can't tell you the origin, and I'm going to keep hunting for it. So stay tuned. The story goes like this. There was a place, and I believe it was in the Pacific Northwest, where the salmon had stopped running up the rivers. The rivers were going dry. Well, the rivers weren't going dry. They just didn't have salmon in them anymore. And the biologists were freaking out because they understand that it's a 3-year cycle in terms of when egg is laid and when the salmon go out to the oceans, and then the salmon come back to the rivers where their egg was laid to lay their eggs. And so this season there were no salmon, and they were just beside themselves. And they were with one of the men that had been living on this land for generations and generations and generations. And he just laughed at them. And he said, I'm going to give you the salmon song. And every morning at dawn, you're going to go and you're going to sing salmon song into that river. And the salmon will come back. And he went on his way. The biologists, I guess, didn't have anything better to do. So every morning at dawn, they went and they sang salmon song into that river. The salmon came home that year. More salmon than they'd ever seen before, the largest salmon run in history. And the biologist said that they just didn't know, that there was no explanation except for a song. I share this because it's so easy to believe that the stories that we need to thrive in these times are gone. And a lot of our stories have been lost, but that all of those stories were caught by people who knew how to listen. And as storytellers, that's what we are first. We are listeners. We're listeners to the life of the land, the life of the times that we're living in. And then we sing the stories back so that the story can keep going. And if you feel called to play this role, I am really in the joy and pleasure of having a school for sacred storytelling where we do just that. And I have a program called the Alchemy of Story. And for those who feel complete, I want to bid you adieu and hope that you carry powerful, beautiful stories into your life, that you know the value and power of your story when you give it away. And for those who feel inclined to step in and are wondering about what it is to be part of a community who is learning together how to bring back this sacred art and wants to do that together with a crew of guest teachers from around the globe, I'm going to take a few moments out and I'm going to introduce you to this program. So I'll wave farewell to those of you who are going, and I'll say hello to those of you who are staying. I'm going to give you guys a couple of links. There's something also that I always forget to tell people, and I'll tell you right now. We have a monthly membership, and this monthly membership is we meet on the new moon and the full moon of every year, and excuse me, of every month. And we meet 3 times. The new moon we meet and I do what's called an oracle story. It's a divination story about what's the story that's living in our collective consciousness, and how do we together and wisdom weave explore how that story is living through us. Terry's in there. And so, and Terry, if you want to write something in the chat box about your experience and tell people what that is, you can do that. I'm sure people would enjoy reading it. On the full moon, we get together and we co-create a vision story together. And I can't say how meaningful this is when we get to go into the imaginal plane together and work out our visionary skills, work out what it is to be storytellers, planting the seeds of a beautiful future into our time. It's also a way to really test and work out your mythic imagination and receive guidance together. So that's really fun. And then we also meet for a creative jam once a month. And that's an opportunity for I'll give creative prompts, but also if you're working on something and you want a community that you can test it out and get some receive some feedback, that's another opportunity to do that. So if you're interested in that, we're actually redoing my website as we speak. But the membership is $33 a month for 3 live sessions. It's kind of epic and lovely. If you're interested in that, you can just email us there and we'll get you that link. Um, then then. Oh, I love that, Terry. A scientist shared that the universe is not made of atoms, it is made of stories. Okay, then what's coming up is the alchemy of story. And this is a program that I'm teaching. An assemblage of basically about 6 years of working with story as a tool for healing. And I consider it almost like the master's program of what I have to offer. And through this program, we meet for, and you have an opportunity to go to attend in 2 different ways. You might want to attend in where we meet every week for 6 weeks per module, or you might say, I want an intensive experience. And in that case, we meet for 3.5 days. Um, and through the program, you go through a journey of learning the oldest stories, lineage stories, origin stories. You'll get to really have an experience of working out your mythic imagination and learning how to tell your own private soul story. You'll also have an opportunity to really dive in to your life experiences and learn how to tell your stories as wisdom stories. That's that giveaway that we were talking about. And where you talk about those initiations and thresholds and get to stand in the power and the pleasure of having something to give away. We also will have an opportunity to learn how to tell teaching stories and learn how to tell vision stories and how to lead other people through that process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the website where you can learn all about it. And you're going to have to excuse us. For some reason, our big, beautiful banner and the pictures of our teachers, I don't know why. We're on a week-long journey of understanding why WordPress won't show our pictures, but we're working it out. But the copy is there, and you'll see that our next course begins in September. And what I can say is that this is really for people who want to be standing up for the times that we're living in and playing a role in it. And that we're really working with story. Obviously, I'm not here to teach you about story for marketing or how to increase your social media, but I am here to teach about storytelling as a sacred healing art and as something that can really be a powerful role in healing our communities and that really gives us strong roots to help us stay centered and grounded during changing times. I think it is one of the most revolutionary acts when you really understand the power of being a storied human and playing a role in the story of our times. And so it sounds like it's for kids, right? This whole storytelling thing. I think it's for people who are willing to be warriors, warriors in their own life, warriors in the realm of consciousness. It's really about how brave, how courageous can you be to stretch the limits of your own imagination and take reins of the story of our time. And so it's one of my favorite places to play in these days. And what I'm also doing is we will do information sessions. So if you're like, this sounds interesting, is it for me? You will see on there that there's a link, and I'll give it to you also, where you can schedule a private one-on-one session. And what I'll say is that we've got something coming up, which is the courses start in September, but through August and September, I'm going to be leading several 2-hour sessions that are all about taking on very specific stories of our time. We're going to look at the story of scarcity, the story of health, the story of work. And we're going to look at how are these stories influencing and impacting us as individuals and a collective. And for those who register for the program, those come as your extra gift. It's 6 extra hours of bonus classes that you will get right into, along with our master teacher library and all the goods. So if you feel compelled, that gift stands until Tuesday. And that is there for you. And if you feel like you want a private session, to really understand if this is a program that will really support you in living the life that you're most wanting to live right now and access that life force and connection and sovereignty, then there we go. It's a lot of talking. I never talk this much in class. Kimberly can attest to that. If there are any questions, I will happy to receive any questions right now or any final thoughts. And otherwise, I will end us with a quote. Lorna.
I wasn't clear. I'm already signed up, as you know, for the September class.
Yep.
Does that mean I'll be able to come to the ones that you're offering?
So I'm for the whole program, for
it's the whole
people who
program.
register for the whole program, get the
I am.
3 extra bonus classes.
Okay, thank you.
Is it 3.5 days on Zoom or in person? Asked Jan. Right now it is on Zoom. And what I can say is that I know that sounds a little bit like torture. What I'll say is that it's actually a lot of fun. It's very interactive. Look, Kimberly was there. She's saying it's not torture. We do a lot of time that's like your creation time. Sometimes we do it outside and you get a lot of one-on-one time. It's not sitting there and staring at a screen. I can tell you that. It's highly, highly interactive, as are all the classes. I was looking for something. Oh, I know what I was going to give you guys a quote. I may have just lost my own. Oops, I can't find that quote for you guys right now. Sorry. Oh, wait, yes, I can. Sorry about that.
Can I throw something in?
Welcome.
Leah, can I just
Yes.
throw out that's as your voice is beautiful and I love your talking today, but that is true that in your 3.5-day intensive, you break it up with your beautiful voice and your beautiful storytelling. And then there's other storytellers. And then we also have the time to do meditation, to do free writes, to do movement in our body, right? To tell the stories, to embody the stories. So I just wanted to throw that out because you had mentioned about the talking today. So
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Everything she says is absolutely true. And I'm answering Karen's question. Can we purchase just the bonus classes? You can. You can. You can. And those will be coming out, being announced later this week. Any other questions before I give you your last quote? Okay, here we go. This is from Stephen Jenkinson. Act as if you are people of consequence so that I can treat you as such, and you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed that there was consequence to us being here. So may you tell your stories and know that they are weaving our world. Wish you all the best. You can take yourselves off mute and give a little hoot and holler. Lovely to be with all of you in all of your expressive ways. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, good to see you. Dan, nice. Hi.
From where? From Yom.
I do know. I know exactly where.
I'm so happy to see you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye, my friend.
Bye.